So, just in the interest of setting it up, I was just going to read a little summary of what's occurred, you know, or where we are basically in the story, just
Okay.
to kind of give us, I mean, and then we can start listening and
Yeah.
comment. So, Book Six of the Iliad centers on a temporary lull in the fighting that allows Homer to shift from battlefield action to the human emotions and relationships that underpin the war. As the Greeks push the Trojans back towards their city walls, the Trojan hero Hector returns to Troy to urge prayers and sacrifices to the gods and to rally the people. The shift from combat to domestic scenes highlights the broader stakes of the conflict, not just glory and honor, but families, loved ones, and the survival of a city. Several important events set up the atmosphere of Book Six. At the end of Book Five, Diomedes, empowered by Athena, dominates the battlefield, even wounding Aphrodite and Ares. This divine involvement creates chaos among the Trojans and forces the gods to momentarily withdraw, which in turn gives the Greeks the upper hand. All this is interesting to us, in we can return to the momentum of Greek success sets the stage for a Trojan retreat toward their walls, making Hector's return to Troy in Book Six both necessary and urgent. Additionally, the earlier battling of war of Diomedes to synonym, uh, and others underscore the brutality of war, amplifying the emotional impact of it. And then, so in the two major scenes, it seems, is between Diomedes and Glaucus in Book Six itself, and where they agree not to fight, basically, when they discover their grandfathers were guest friends,
Hmm.
an episode that illustrates the values of hospitality and shared heritage, um, it, uh, during war. And then and then there's a scene with Hector and his wife and his infant son, and a kind of poignant. Uh, it ultimately foreshadowing his death too. So it's a kind of sad parting. Um, but Book Six takes place. It's a kind of lull, essentially, in the combat. It's worth talking about Diomedes. I mean, here again, I think that to the audience, we should find it striking that basically the gods, the gods leaving the battlefield, or would allow the Greeks success, right? So it's almost like the Greeks are in opposition to the gods,
Mm.
ostensibly Greek gods, right? This is all interesting to us. But of course, what the gods represent, they represent more global forces, it would seem, right? Zeus is both the god of the Trojans and the god of the Greeks. And the Greeks find themselves against the gods in a kind of Promethean way, you could argue, right? Um, so Aphrodite and Ares are wounded, and both these gods, Arium theory classifies both these gods as Aryan gods, both Aphrodite and Ares. And they are wounded. And Athena is sort of on the side of the Greeks, so she helps Diomedes, uh, attain this power to basically drive Ares from the battlefield, uh, shrieking from the battlefield. Um, so all of this is interesting to us just to, understand this is a kind of complex work. Um, and the gods are not strictly these sort of tribal Greek gods that would defend the Greeks at all costs, whether they're fighting the Trojans or whoever else. But the Iliad reveals them as these more global forces, that nevertheless, individually, each of the deities still have a kind of represent ethnic archetypes, essentially. And that's an argument made in REM theory. Um, so it would seem, and at this point in this story, it seemed even Zeus is kind of ambivalent, but he's kind of Troy leaning at this point, right? Uh, Diomedes' name is interesting. Diomedes' name means Council of Zeus. Um, but he's not really favored by Zeus. So, you know, I mean, it's almost his name might who knows? This is a kind of speculation. I'm spitballing, but it might even be a reference to Athena, who would be a counsel of Zeus, right? She's the goddess of wisdom, um, and and she's also the one that assists him and allows him to drive Aphrodite and Ares from the battlefield. All right, I'll let you
Well,
jump in, or yeah, or
yeah.
please.
Well, yeah, a couple of things. I mean, as certainly many of have pointed out, there is a sort of resistive reading that is actually quite easy to take in the Iliad, in the sense that, Paris is very selfish and frivolous, you could say, but Hector is not. And even Paris is a complex character, and Hector is complex and heroic. And Priam will meet when we hit chapter 24, but this is a deep and deeply sympathetic character. Um, Even Helen is someone that is ambivalent and treated with a lot of sympathy. And so there is a sort of resistive reading of this really is the tragedy of the Trojans in the sense that we should sympathize with the Trojans, and arguably the Greeks are the bad guys.
Yeah, I
Um,
don't even think it's a resistive reading. I think it's just it's
yeah,
there. It's the
it's an easy
complexity of
resistive reading.
the Iliad. Yeah, I mean, I think that I mean, obviously the Greeks recognize that, and I think that that must be one of the reasons that they loved it because of this sort of complexity, and it was sort of honoring your enemy and so forth, right?
Yeah. I mean,
So,
I mean, you can
oh,
feel
please.
sympathetic to Achilles in a way, but he's certainly not as human and sympathetic as Hector and Agamemnon. I mean, Agamemnon, excuse me. I mean, the guy is just a bastard, basically. Um,
Yeah, he's like Netanyahu or something. He's just
yeah,
some cocksucker, basically.
yeah. So it is interesting. I mean, do you think there's do you think the gods? I mean, roughly speaking, Hera is clearly on the side of the Greeks, as is Athena, and I was just looking this up actually a little bit, it's kind of sketching it out. Poseidon will be on the side of the Greeks as well as Hermes, Mercury that is, and Hephaestus, and then the gods favoring the Trojan. I mean, Apollo is blamed in the Wrath of Achilles for the Trojan War. Mars or Ares is on there. Venus or Aphrodite, Leto. That's a different type of goddess. But I mean, do you think there's a sort of ethnic significance to the gods favoring each side? I mean, do you think there's something that can be drawn from that?
Again, it's complex. It seems like it's complex, but it's sort of like I mean, any modern day analog that we make is sort of flawed, right? So
Hmm.
if we were to compare it to if we were to compare it to the wars in the Middle East, for instance, I mean, I think that well, there isn't like, basically Aryans are not really players in terms of their interests in the Middle East, right?
Yeah.
These sort of forever wars in the Middle East. I mean, Aryans are not we're sort of these kind of cannon fodder, we're these sort of janissary that partake, but it's not our interests that are involved,
Yeah.
right? um and so I mean I would propose that something more like that's happening, in the sense that um I think that there are, like, I mean, one of the things that's a kind of important theme, obviously, in the Trojan War is that wars are ultimately caused by uh, you know the personalities of leaders of countries, right? And
Yeah.
um, and maybe not always in the modern world, maybe not always for sort of the seemingly petty reasons in which this war was waged. Um, but I don't know. I mean, I think that there is something revealing about the fact that just because Athena and Hera feel insulted by Paris's choice, uh, they're going to back, um, yeah, they're going to back the Greeks, right?
Yeah.
Whereas Aphrodite's going to, because she's flattered by his choice, is going to back the Trojans.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that I do think that you see that in politics. I mean, we see it very plainly in what we call the dissident right. It's just these sort of like, I mean, I came up with this term the other day, um, uh, reduction or um, it's reduction to high school, basically.
Hmm.
It's a kind of whereas formerly we had this kind of, and I mean, it's sort of weird to look back at the old media landscape sort of fondly because evidently it was a kind of Jewish controlled media landscape if we're just speaking explicitly. Now it's social media, and there's all this kind of criticism on social media for Jews and so forth. So you can't really fairly say that social media is controlled by Jews, right? I mean, to say, I think that I don't think social media is like this free democratic thing. I think the thing is 100% manipulated, and people who are in power are basically using algorithms to kind of favor their positions essentially, and with some with some success, but not total success. But what you see is that it's now more and more the media landscape is this is sort of a kind of, we're a little off topic, but maybe it's related. But we see more and more it's dominated by individuals. Um, Movies, for example, or cinema matter less.
Yeah.
Art matters less, and it's more about these sort of the this sort of constellation of these different personalities that are basically politicos, and whether or not the environment has become very politicized, and whether or not they're getting along with each other, whether or not like Shapiro's getting along with fucking Tucker or
Hmm.
Fuentes. It's like it's a high school like thing that's happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And um but I think that uh, how does this relate to the Trojan Wars? I think that one of the themes in the Trojan War is that there are these sort of kind of just petty personal individual interests that are causing this conflict effectively, And if we think of, and we can think here of the gods as individuals, as like kings or as presidents or something like this. Um, and so that they are motivated by these petty personal things and these personal dislikes and so forth, right? They dislike some other guy because he insulted him or whatever. And so they're going to actually go to war, right? Because
Hmm.
of the insult and so forth. Um, so maybe that the analog of the current sort of media landscape um, allows us to see that like a lot of times these conflicts are just personal in origin. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? Especially when you know people have actively sort of like taken the ethnicity and race question out of it and said this is not what this is about. It's about Christianity versus Judaism or whatever the case may be, or even socialism versus libertarianism, extreme libertarianism and capitalism and so forth, which seems to be a theme that's emerging as well.
Hmm.
Um, I think you understand my point. So I think that is a part of the Iliad. I mean, I was just thinking about today. I was kind of thinking about just how remarkable the Iliad is, just as a work of literature, given how early it appears, and obviously I mean, it's one of the most. I mean, I think maybe you could say it's the most influential work in the Western canon of
Yeah,
literature.
arguably, yeah.
And in that, but of course, that's Nathan, or what's the guy's name? Harold Bloom was talking about Shakespeare, and so when I was doing a little research for the Shakespeare stuff, I was listening to some of his thoughts, and students will occasionally come up to him and say, "Well, why is Shakespeare even relevant anymore?" Right?
Hmm.
And his response, which I think is not, I think it's actually he could up with a better response than he does, and he does have better answers to this. Uh, but one of his responses was, well, because it's sort of like asking, why are my parents relevant, right?
Yeah.
Because they gave birth to me, and I wouldn't exist without them. So and you see something I would say it's thricefold when it comes to the Iliad
Hmm.
is maybe the single most important work of literature in the Western canon. You could argue that certainly. You know what I mean? And but just the sophistication of it for that time is pretty remarkable. I mean, it does feel the people feel very familiar to us. Um, and so and I guess this goes against Harold Bloom's idea that the human was invented by Shakespeare. But his
Yeah, it
point is still.
does. Just to dwell on that really quickly. I mean, it does, and maybe this has something to do with the translation by Fitzgerald, which is very good, or even Derek Jacobi's performance of it. But you have these flesh and blood, complex, emotional presentation of character at this stage. And, there's some interesting characters in the Bible, but you have to sort of search for it. There aren't these grand speeches that unfurl their character for you in the Bible. And I'm thinking more of the Hebrew Bible here than the Gospels are a little bit different. But it is fascinating the sophistication and all of the things that Harold Bloom says about Shakespeare, which I basically agree with. I mean, he's speaking kind of in vagaries, if we're being honest, but the notion of overhearing yourself and self-consciousness and the ability to kind of change and so on that he thinks is the modern human, to be critical of yourself, which is obviously Hamlet like. It seems like you can actually find that here some what are we thinking, 1200 years perhaps before Shakespeare is writing.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, Bloom overstates the case, obviously, but he
Yeah.
makes a point that's worth making, which is um, there is a refinement with Shakespeare that's remarkable,
By the
obviously.
way, I actually last night I saw a high school production of A Midsummer Night's Dream in Montana. So um maybe I set the bar very low for my enjoyment level. I actually thought about that going in there. I was like, if these guys have learned their lines, then I'm gonna be impressed. And they absolutely learned their lines and they delivered it. And it was actually very enjoyable, I have to say. Just listening to the text, and they're high schoolers, but they're trying hard. So I was impressed.
It's been a while since I've seen that play, but I remember the last time I saw that play feeling that it was remarkably pagan, right?
Oh yeah,
And
definitely.
but
There's the
it also
queen, king and queen of the fairies, and yeah,
I don't know. I assume this was part of the original text because when I saw the play the last time, um, there's a kind of because it's spoken in the Elizabethan like Shakespearean uh
sure.
poetry or language. Um, there's a kind of apology in the play for how sort of pagan it is, essentially, right? If I'm
Well, yeah,
remembering
Puck
correctly,
says,
there's
well,
some.
it's twice actually. Like there's a prologue before the play within the play where there's an apology, as you say, and then there's an apology with Puck. Like if we've offended anyone, we of course our purpose was only to entertain, and you should maybe think upon this play as a dream, almost like to pretend that it's frivolous. Yeah, I think that that sentiment is definitely there.
Yeah. So it is a very interesting play. That play is also, I'm sure, worthy of analysis.
Hmm.
And the central character has a donkey head or something, or he turns into a donkey.
Yes,
What are the
Bottom.
events?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Bottom is a sort of weaver, and they're sort of the proletariat or hand workers, you could say, but he's a bombastic, self-absorbed actor, and he's given a donkey's head, and then um, Oberon, who's the king of the fairies, just puts a kind of juice from a flower onto his queen's um, Titania. So there's the famous line, "Ill met by moonlight, proud Titania," and anyway, they're having a quarrel, and so he makes her fall in love with this ass as a sort of joke, and then of course they're reconciled at the end. But there is a kind of little, I don't know, a kind of hint of Dionysian bestiality or something about this woman like stroking the ears of a donkey. I mean, it's kind of fun. It's funny, of course, but there's a hint of that. And then the lovers, there's sort of a love triangle, and then they get the potion put on their eyelids by Puck, and they fall in love with one another. And um I think there's a little bit of a sentiment of as well, like love is I think actually Helena says this. Helena is the most interesting character, and she says something to this effect of love is not in the eye, but it's in the mind in a way. So it really, and I think what she means by, I mean, it's sort of like Hamlet, nothing's either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. It's a sort of idea that Shakespeare seems convinced of, which is that your imagination creates reality. And so you could be in love with this woman or that woman or a donkey, who knows? Uh, it's all due to your maybe your humors to some extent, but also your mind and perception.
Yeah, I mean, it seems heavily inspired by pagan myth.
Hmm.
It reminds me of so Minus's wife is made to fall in love with a bull, and
Hmm.
then she's and that bull sires the Minotaur through Minus's wife. You know what I mean? And
It might be a sort of soft version of something like that, which is pretty shocking. And it's even fascinating that these metaphors are persistent today in the realm of porn and social media, which are certainly dumb on some level and scatological and horrible, but maybe are kind of getting at something basic to our worldview or archetypal or something. Falling in love with a bull.
yeah, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's like in probably that word um, in the pornographic context. I mean, probably originates from the porn industry itself. So it
Hmm.
could even have like some a kind of esoteric
Yeah.
significance or whatever. But and but the Dionysus, or rather the donkey, of course, is a symbol of Dionysus,
Hmm.
and which we've discussed many times. And I think that this is what you were pointing to before. And especially as a kind of mount, I would argue. So
Hmm.
Dionysus is not so much represented by the donkey, or it's not so much a totem of him, but it's a kind of attribute. It represents something that he masters or he controls, like Judah controls the donkey and so forth. Um, the and I in the other myth it reminds me of is the myth when Midas is given donkey ears, because he's judging the music. He's judging essentially Apollonian music versus Dionysian, and he favors the
Yes.
Dionysian music, right? There's a satyr in a musical contest against Apollo. And Midas is like, I actually like the Dionysian, I
Hmm.
like the jazz music versus,
Yeah.
whatever, you know, I don't know, Handel's Messiah, right?
Right. Well, yeah, I think I could sense that because it's like a lyre which has a plucked string that is maybe precise as opposed to a flute that's maybe a kind of ambiguous music. It would I look, I like popular music as well, but when someone's like, Kanye West album. When you really think about it, it's as great and complicated as Beethoven. You just sort of want to give them donkey's ears.
Yeah, and there's it could be something to that. The idea that the Apollonian music is structured,
Yes.
and is has these distinct, clear notes, right?
Yes.
Um, whereas the flute music is more, as you say, is more ambiguous or just
Hmm.
kind of blended and formless in its way, or relatively speaking. Um, and that's something that's missed by Nietzsche's famous dichotomy, right? He puts all music in the Dionysian.
Hmm.
Um, and you can actually see he's developing it. You can actually see the justification for it. You can understand the justification for it. Music is something that's invisible, you know,
Yeah.
which I think is also meaningful. The other thing I was, yeah, so but the other thing I would say too is that there might even be some myths that I'm not remembering or I never learned that are, that are closer parallels, and that are more direct inspirations, for, myths, or for, symbols and events appearing in that play. But regardless, it just seems like it's deeply sort of pagan.
Hmm.
And yeah, I think it's humorous that there's a kind of there are apologies basically apologizing for the fact that it's not Christian essentially, it's pagan.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think this has been a very interesting discussion, but we probably should jump to the text. Someone had their hand up. If I don't know if you want to jump back in, or we can answer a question, or we can just jump to to
Yeah,
the
that
text.
that that was me. I
Yeah,
was
go
just
ahead.
gonna quickly I was gonna quickly just say I think it's worth noting that Poseidon, Hera, and Athena do conspire at an earlier time against Zeus. It's mentioned in book 15, I believe.
Oh, okay, interesting.
So I don't know what you would make of that, but it's sort of worth noting.
Let's note that I think I wasn't planning on our reading book 15, but we can Mark and I can go take a look at that and see if there's some significance there. Okay. I think this should chapter 6.
Book 6. Glaucus and Diomede. The story of Bellerophon. Hector and Andromache. The fight between Trojans and Achaeans was now left to rage as it would, and the tide of war surged hither and thither over the plain as they aimed their bronze-shod spears at one another between the streams of Simois and Xanthus. First Ajax, son of Telamon, tower of strength to the Achaeans, broke a phalanx of the Trojans, and came to the assistance of his comrades by killing Acamas, son of Eusorus, the best man among the Thracians, being both brave and of great stature. The spear struck the projecting peak of his helmet, its bronze point then went through his forehead into the brain, and darkness veiled his eyes. Then Diomed killed Axylus son of Teuthranus, a rich man who lived in the strong city of Erispe, and was beloved by all men, for he had a house by the roadside, and entertained every one who passed, howbeit not one of his guests stood before him to save his life, and Diomed killed both him and his squire Calesius, who was then his charioteer. So the pair passed beneath the earth. Euryalus killed Dresus and Opheltius, and then went in pursuit of Asipus and Pedasus, whom the naiad nymph Abarbarea had borne to noble Bucolion. Bucolion was eldest son to Laomedon, but he was a bastard. While tending his sheep he had converse with the nymph, and she conceived twin sons. These the son of Mecisteus now slew, and he stripped the armour from their shoulders. Polypoetes then killed Astyalos, Ulysses, Pidytes of Percote, Aretaean. Ablerus fell by the spear of Nestor's son Antilochus, and Agamemnon, king of men, killed Elatus, who dwelt in Pedasus by the banks of the river Satnoius. Leitus killed Phylacus as he was flying, and Eurypylus slew Melanthus. Then Menelaus of the loud war-cry took Adrestus alive, for his horses ran into a tamarisk bush, as they were flying wildly over the plain, and broke the pole from the car. They went on towards the city along with the others in full flight, but Adrestus rolled out, and fell in the dust flat on his face by the wheel of his chariot. Menelaus came up to him, spear in hand, but Adrestus caught him by the knees, begging for his life. "Take me alive," he cried, "son of Atreus, and you shall have a full ransom for me. My father is rich, and has much treasure of gold, bronze, and wrought iron laid by in his house. From this store he will give you a large ransom should he hear of my being alive and at the ships of the Achaeans." Thus did he plead, and Menelaus was for yielding and giving him to a squire to take to the ships of the Achaeans. But Agamemnon came running up to him and rebuked him. "My good Menelaus," said he, "this is no time for giving quarter. Has then your house fared so well at the hands of the Trojans? Let us not spare a single one of them, not even the child unborn and in its mother's womb. Let not a man of them be left alive, but let all in unheeded and forgotten." Thus did he speak, and his brother was persuaded by him, for his words were just. Menelaus therefore thrust
So,
Adrestus
Richard, I guess
from
we can
him,
stop it there.
while King Agamemnon.
Just to remark that, so again, we see Agamemnon is a kind of zealot. I mean, it reminds us of Joshua in the Hebrew Bible. He like leave no man alive, right?
Yeah.
So he's kind of merciless. He's depicted as merciless.
Oh,
Did his
oops.
foot upon the breast to draw,
I'll just back it
and
up a
he
little
fell.
bit.
Then the son of Atreus planted his foot upon the breast to draw his spear from the body. Meanwhile Nestor shouted to the Argives, saying, "My friends, Danaan warriors, servants of Mars, let no man lag that he may spoil the dead, and bring back much booty to the ships. Let us kill as many as we can. The bodies will lie upon the plain, and you can despoil them later at your leisure." With these words he put heart and soul into them all. And now the Trojans would have been routed and driven back into Ilius had not Priam's son Helenus, wisest of augurs, said to Hector and Aeneas, "Hector and Aeneas, you two are the mainstays of the Trojans and Lycians, for you are foremost at all times, alike in fight and counsel. Hold your ground here, and go about among the host to rally them in front of the gates, or they will fling themselves into the arms of their wives, to the great joy of our foes. Then, when you have put heart into all our companies, we will stand firm here and fight the Danaans however hard they press us, for there is nothing else to be done. Meanwhile, do you, Hector, go to the city and tell our mother what is happening. Tell her to bid the matrons gather at the temple of Minerva in the Acropolis. Let her then take her key and open the doors of the sacred building. There, upon the knees of Minerva, let her lay the largest, fairest robe she has in her house, the one she sets most store by. Let her moreover promise to sacrifice 12 yearling heifers that have never yet felt the goad, in the temple of the goddess, if she will take pity on the town, with the wives and little ones of the Trojans, and keep the son of Tydeus from falling on the goodly city of Ilius, for he fights with fury and fills men's souls with panic. I hold him mightiest of them all. We did not fear even their great champion Achilles, son of a goddess though he be, as we do this man. His rage is beyond all bounds, and there is none can vie with him in prowess." Hector did as his brother bade him. He sprang from his chariot, and went about everywhere among the host, brandishing his spears, urging the men on to fight, and raising the dread cry of battle. Thereon they rallied, and again faced the Achaeans, who gave ground and ceased their murderous onset, for they deemed that some one of the immortals had come down from starry heaven to help the Trojans, so strangely had they rallied. And Hector shouted to the Trojans, "Trojans and allies, be men, my friends, and fight with might and main, while I go to Ilius and tell the old men of our council and our wives to pray to the gods and vow hecatombs in their honour." With this he went his way, and the black rim of hide that went round his shield beat against his neck and his ankles. Then Glaucus, son of Hippolochus and the son of Tydeus, went into the open space between the hosts to fight in single combat. When they were close up to one another, Diomed of the loud war-cry was the first to speak. "Who, my good sir," said he, "who are you among men? I have never seen you in battle until now, but you are daring beyond all others if you abide my onset. Woe to those fathers whose sons face my might. If, however, you are one of the immortals, and have come down from heaven, I will not fight you. For even valiant Lycurgus, son of Dryas, did not live long when he took to fight. He it was drove the nursing women who were in charge of frenzied Bacchus through the land of Nysa, and they flung their thyrsi on the ground, as murderous Lycurgus beat them with his ox-goad. Bacchus himself plunged terror-stricken into the sea, and Thetis took him to her bosom to comfort him, for he was...
This is interesting. Um, First off, it, this is in the worldview of Homer, it is basically the gods that win battles, and to experience a god is to be sort of possessed by him. And gods can enter the battle almost directly, which seems to be implied. I'm just reading from my translation. This is Fagel's. I don't know what translation this is, but it is. I've been following it. I was trying to find a PDF from it, but I've been following it. It's different
Yeah,
translator.
it seems that Ares does enter the battle directly.
Yeah.
Athena, however, doesn't enter directly. She uses Diomedes as her instrument, essentially.
Mm-hmm. It's just I don't know if we want to talk about that strange mention of Dionysus. This is around line 150 in the Fagles, a little bit. It's like 152. Um, I'm not the man to fight the gods of heaven. Not even. So this is Glaucus, son of and Tydeus. So I'm not the man to fight the gods of heaven, not even Dryas, indestructible son Lycurgus. Not even he lived long, the fellow who tried to fight the deathless gods. So this is man against God. He rushed at the Maenads once, nurses of wild Dionysus, scattered them breakneck down the holy mountain Nyssa. A rout of them strewed their sacred staves on the ground, raked with a cattle prod by Lycurgus, murderous fool. And Dionysus was terrified. He dove beneath the surf, where the sea nymph Thetis pressed him to her breast. Dionysus, numb with fear, shivers racked his body, thanks to the raucous onslaught of that man. But the gods who live at ease lashed out against him. Worse, the son of Cronos, that is Zeus, struck Lycurgus blind, nor did the man live long, not with the hate of all the gods against him. So it's interesting that Dionysus was terrified and dove into the sea, in fact, but then the gods sort of rallied to punish any mortal who would do such a thing.
Yeah, I mean Dionysus is a demigod. He's
Has a mortal mother,
so
yeah.
yeah, ostensibly he's a kind of lesser god. Um, but I think that that's not a that's giving him too little credit ultimately, or at least as he appears in myth and art, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it shows that there's a kind of that gods are mightier by degree, but they're not untouchable ultimately. We see in Ares, despite being an immortal god and one of the original immortal gods, he's one of the few gods that are born both of Hera and Zeus.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to think of another god that I mean, um, Hephaestus is usually thought to have been born only of Hera, right? And there to me it seems clear what's implied is a kind of cuckoldry of Zeus essentially.
Mm.
But it's a virgin birth. Well, virgin's the wrong word, but it's a asexual birth. Um, and I think that might be, probably due to sort of sexism in the ancient world or bias in the ancient world that would like Hera would become beyond the pale if she was unfaithful to Zeus.
Right.
right? So I think it's more implied through metaphors and euphemisms when it's described. Um, but yeah, so yeah, so that line, that veil, or that border between man and God is um, thin, maybe. And we see that Hercules, for example, is immortal, though he's descended from Zeus, right? And Achilles as well has um, divine blood, but Hercules is able. He's alone among the heroes that he's able to become essentially a god himself, become immortal,
Yeah.
right? It does seem that there were cults devoted to Hercules. Hercules would become very popular in the ancient world, also with the Romans. And I think that Thor is ultimately, I think he was, Thor is ultimately a kind of reference to Hercules, I think, um, if also other gods.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, but he does break that boundary and become immortal. And he marries Hebe, the goddess of youth, right? And she's the one who's responsible for giving the gods the nectar and so forth that keeps them immortal. So presumably that's how um, Hercules becomes immortal. So in a way, he kind of, and you could even argue it's sort of implied that he's sort of taking away their source of immortality by marrying this cupbearer and goddess of youth, and then she's replaced by this catamite, essentially,
Hmm.
who becomes the new cupbearer. So it does seem like something subversive is going on in that myth ultimately. In any case, we're sort of off topic,
Hmm.
but I guess
Scared
we
by
can
the
return to
fury
the
with
text.
which the man reviled him. Thereon the gods who live at ease were angry with Lycurgus, and the son of Saturn struck him blind, nor did he live much longer after he had become hateful to the immortals. Therefore I will not fight with the blessed gods, but if you are of them that eat the fruit of the ground, draw near and meet your doom. And the
Richard,
son of
one
Hippolochus
note
answered,
though.
Son of
Hmm.
So just a note. Nysa. So this is where this episode happens with the Maenads being driven off Mount Nysa, including also Dionysus, right? But Nysa, sometimes Nysa is thought to be the root of Dionysus. So sometimes Dionysus is thought to be derived from um, elements meaning essentially the Zeus of Nysa. So
Hmm.
Nysa may have Nysa, and sometimes Nysa is thought to be either where Dionysus was born or where he was nursed, essentially.
Hmm.
Mount Ida also has that reputation, though.
Yeah. Interesting.
Tydeus, why ask me of my lineage? Men come and go as leaves year by year upon the trees. Those of autumn the wind sheds upon the ground, but when spring returns the forest buds forth with fresh vines. Even so is it with the generations of mankind. The new spring up as the old are passing away. If then you would learn my descent, it is one that is well known to many. There is a city in the heart of Argos, pasture land of horses, called Ephyra, where Sisyphus lived, who was the craftiest of all mankind. He was the son of Aeolus, and had a son named Glaucus, who was father to Bellerophon, whom heaven endowed with the most surpassing comeliness and beauty. But Proetus devised his ruin, and being stronger than he, drove him from the land of the Argives over which Jove had made him ruler. For Antea, wife of Proetus, lusted after him, and would have had him lie with her in secret. But Bellerophon was an honourable man, and would not, so she told lies about him to Proetus. Proetus, said she, kill Bellerophon or die, for he would have had converse with me against my will. The king was angered, but shrank from killing Bellerophon, so he sent him to Lycia with lying letters of introduction, written on a folded tablet and containing much ill against the bearer. He bade Bellerophon show these letters to his father-in-law, to the end that he might thus perish. Bellerophon therefore went to Lycia, and the gods conveyed him safely. When he reached the river Xanthus, which is in Lycia, the king received him with all good will, feasted him 9 days, and killed 9 heifers in his honour. But when rosy-fingered morn appeared upon the 10th day, he questioned him, and desired to see the letter from his son-in-law Proetus. When he had received the wicked letter, he first commanded Bellerophon to kill that savage monster, the Chimera, who was not a human being, but a goddess, for she had the head of a lion and the tail of a serpent, while her body was that of a goat, and she breathed forth flames of fire. But Bellerophon slew her, for he was guided by signs from heaven. He next fought the far-famed Solymi, and this he said was the hardest of all his battles.
So Richard,
Thirdly, he killed the Amazons.
I think
the
some of
Chimera
this,
is a
yeah,
kind of interesting mythological beast, and I make the argument that it ultimately represents a kind of a demon of democracy or
hmm,
mixing of classes ultimately, because it's a
interesting.
lion mixed with a goat mixed with a serpent. Um, so I think it's ultimately a reference in the line, you know, representing nobility. One of the myths also uh, describes how the lion lives at the top of the mountain, the goat lives, at the middle, and the
Hmm.
serpent lives at the base of the mountain. So representing essentially classes or types of men, and it's a kind of admixture, a sort of unholy admixture of types of men, the nobility with um, a lower class represented by the goat, presumably, and then maybe the serpent represents something Eastern or Semitic. So the Chimera um, has that significance in my mind, or I believe that that's ultimately what it represents. I think the name also is interesting. I think one meaning that etymologists give chimera is winter goat, which I think
Hmm.
is interesting as well, right? So it's maybe it also the way that Dionysus is the god of winter and Apollo is the god of summer and spring and so forth. That may also be a reference to it as representing some kind of decadence or decline.
Doesn't this, am I wrong? A story like this happens to Joseph in Genesis, doesn't it? To the plot more or less of Bellerophon, where the Pharaoh's wife is in love with him, and but he doesn't return the favor, and then she accuses him of these things.
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I don't. I think that there are probably multiple stories where that happens,
Yeah.
but this is one example, certainly. Um, and yeah, so
Yeah,
in
it's just again interesting in terms of the Copenhagen thesis. I mean, obviously situations like this happen today, and I mean you can it doesn't, it's not 100% proof that the the Septuagint, say, was inspired by Homer to some degree, but that is the Copenhagen thesis, basically, that even the Hebrew Bible, but certainly the Greek Septuagint or Greek Torah, was influenced by the Hellenistic world and was created in Alexandria 250 years or so before the Gospels. Um, Maybe, yeah, I guess more like 350 before the Gospels, but 250 years before Jesus supposedly walked the earth. So it's very interesting. I mean, again, these stories might have been, some aspects of the Hebrew Bible might have been very old, but the fact is, it was all put into one place. It was all made whole around 200, 250 BC. And so this would have taken place in a Hellenistic world in which they were well aware of Plato, they were well aware of Homer, certainly. And so just a little story like this making its way into the Hebrew Bible is quite plausible. We can go on.
Women who were the peers of men, and as he was returning thence the king devised yet another plan for his destruction. He picked the bravest warriors in all Lycia and placed them in ambuscade, but not a man ever came back, for Bellerophon killed every one of them. Then the king knew that he must be the valiant offspring of a god, so he kept him in Lycia, gave him his daughter in marriage, and made him of equal honour in the kingdom with himself, and the Lycians gave him a piece of land, the best in all the country, fair with vineyards and tilled fields, to have and to hold. The king's daughter bore Bellerophon 3 children, Isander, Hippolochus, and Laodamia. The lord of counsel lay with Laodamia, and she bore him noble Sarpedon. But when Bellerophon came to be hated by all the gods, he wandered all desolate and dismayed upon the Ilian plain, gnawing at his own heart, and shunning the path of men. Mars, insatiate of battle, killed his son Isander while he was fighting the Solymi. His daughter was killed by Diana of the golden reins, for she was angered with her. But Hippolochus was father to myself, and when he sent me to Troy he urged me again and again to fight ever among the foremost and outvie my peers, so as not to shame the blood of my fathers, who were the noblest in Ephyra and in all Lycia. This, then, is the descent I claim. Thus did he speak, and the heart of Diana...
There's not really an explanation of why the gods turned on Bellerophon. Anyway.
That explanation may exist elsewhere, and I'm unaware of it myself, though, to be honest with you.
Diomed was glad. He planted his spear in the ground and spoke to him with friendly words. Then he said, "You are an old friend of my father's house. Great Aeneas once entertained Bellerophon for 20 days, and the two exchanged presents. Aeneas gave a belt rich with purple, and Bellerophon a double cup, which I left at home when I set out for Troy. I do not remember Tydeus, for he was taken from us while I was yet a child, when the army of the Achaeans was cut to pieces before Thebes. Henceforth, however, I must be your host in middle Argos, and you mine in Lycia, if I should ever go there. Let us avoid one another's spears even during a general engagement. There are many noble Trojans and allies whom I can kill, if I overtake them and heaven delivers them into my hand. So again with yourself. There are many Achaeans whose lives you may take if you can. We two then will exchange armor, that all present..."
So his sin against the gods was one of excessive pride, hubris. He tried to fly to Mount Olympus on Pegasus, the winged horse, to live among them.
Right. Okay.
So
it's funny how that I did know that story actually. It's funny how that wasn't mentioned. Anyway.
So similar in some ways, it seems, to Icarus, of course,
yeah.
right?
Definitely.
May know of the old ties that subsist between us. With these words they sprang from their chariots, grasped one another's hands, and plighted friendship. But the son of Saturn made Glaucus take leave of his wit, for he exchanged golden armor for bronze, the worth of 100 head of cattle for the worth of 9. Now when Hector reached the Scaean gates and the oak tree, the wives and daughters of the Trojans...
Okay, this is the second half of the chapter. What do you think about that? I mean, there's the discussion of Bellerophon, and then there's a theme of we're not so different, you and I, basically. My grandfather hosted your grandfather one time, and you have this amazing lineage, so why don't we avoid one another's spears? So there's this similarity between the Greeks and the Trojans. And then there's this just curious passage. I mean, this is my translation, the Fagles that I'm using. But let's trade armor. The men must know our claim. We are sworn friends from our father's day till now. But agreed, both fighters sprang from their chariots, clasped each other's hands, and traded pacts of friendship. But the son of Cronos, Zeus, stole Glaucus' wits away. He traded his gold armor for bronze with Diomedes, the worth of 100 oxen just for 9. Is it basically is Diomedes the Trojan?
He's a Greek. Diomedes is a Greek.
Okay.
He's the one who sort of, like, in the absence of Achilles, he is a hero that,
Glaucus is the Trojan.
Yeah. And beats the Trojans back to the walls.
So the Trojans have golden armor, and they're trading for the bronze armor of the Greeks. I don't know if this is, I mean, it's interesting.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, to get back to the sort of the ethnic question, which we've already touched on before, is that what is salient in the depiction of the Trojans is their worship of Apollo, of course, right? And Apollo is the fair-haired Hyperborean god that clearly has a Aryan significance.
Yeah.
And so, and what does that worship of them signify? I would say, and I would say that there is definitely a kind of eugenic aspect of that, right? There's this thesis of Apolloism, um, and whether that was kind of intended from the very origin of the cult or not is its own question. But it does seem likely that the worship of Apollo had a kind of eugenic consequence. And again, the cult itself may have been imperfect, and there could have been problems with the cult, whether by its design or through a kind of later corruption. But I think
Hmm.
you understand my point. There's the worship of this Aryan, this kind of arch Aryan type of Apollo. So the ethnic dimension, I think, really comes to the fore in religion. Um, but there, of course, as well, though it seems that um, Troy is tragic. It's a kind of doomed civilization, and part of that destruction is traceable to a kind of a negligence of religion that's sort of implied in some of the stories. For example, Cassandra rejecting Apollo, the sexual advances of Apollo, right?
Yeah.
Um, and ostensibly she's a priestess of Apollo, or and a follower of Apollo, right? Um, so that points. I would argue that that points to a kind of a decline in their religion and their worship, and this, whether explicitly or implicitly, a kind of eugenic or Aryan telos, right? It
Hmm.
represents a kind of moving away from that essentially, and and maybe one of the ways that we understand that sort of their fate is it's rather a symptom or even a cause of their decline, and the reason that their civilization is destroyed. It's one of the reasons, you could argue, right? Um, but yeah,
Well, I guess what I was saying as well, I mean, if we think about similar stories, I mean, there of course is Esau selling his birthright for a mess of porridge, the classic getting swindled by Jacob. And it's interesting because you have this story that is an a digression basically from the main plot. You have these two guys and they discover they have a lot in common and their grandfathers knew each other and blah blah blah. But the Trojan trades his golden, first off, fighting in golden armor. It's not very practical, but obviously this is a fable allegory. But he trades golden armor for gold and bronze in Plato, of course, is that you have the enlightened elite that should run society versus the bronze, the proletariat, laborers, etc. In Hesiod's ages, obviously the golden, we have a critical perspective on the golden age, but obviously the golden age, it's good. Gold is more valuable than bronze. It has been for millennia. And so I don't know if this whole, like, the upshot of this digression is just a little bit of a commentary of the bronze Greeks defeating the golden Trojans. And even
yeah,
when they
yeah. I mean,
find something in common, you're still getting swindled.
yeah, and the gold also connects to this solar connection or aspect that I was pointing to with
Hmm.
Apollo, right? And this is something actually we point out in our analysis. This is in a later book, but of this parable of metals, where gold represents the nobility,
Hmm.
um, silver represents the auxiliaries, or the kind of the assistants of the nobility, and bronze it represents lower classes essentially.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that that's true. Bronze represents especially Aries, according to those parables.
Hmm.
Because in the age of bronze, they return to, or rather, they went to a devotion of Ares, right? They were committed to warfare and so forth, but worshipped Ares above the other gods, essentially. And bronze is it's the metal of armor as well, traditionally. Gold,
Yeah.
typically armor is not made of gold and so forth. But it also has also has a strong connection to Aphrodite or Venus, bronze, and there it has a kind of sexual or body dimension. It's something, it's related to eros, as opposed to logos or something higher, right?
Yeah. All right, let's continue to listen here.
Trojans came running towards him to ask out sons, brothers, kinsmen, and husbands. He told them to set about praying to the gods, and many were made sorrowful as they heard him. Presently he reached the splendid palace of King Priam, adorned with colonnades of hewn stone. In it there were 50 bedchambers, all of hewn stone, built near one another, where the sons of Priam slept, each with his wedded wife. Opposite these, on the other side of the courtyard, there were 12 upper rooms, also of hewn stone for Priam's daughters, built near one another, where his sons-in-law slept with their wives. When Hector got there, his fond mother came to him with Laodice, the fairest of her daughters. She took his hand within her own and said, "My son, why have you left the battle to come hither? Are the Achaeans, woe betide them, pressing you hard about the city, that you have thought fit to come and uplift your hands to Jove from the citadel? Wait till I can bring you wine, that you may make offering to Jove and to the other immortals, and may then drink and be refreshed. Wine gives a man fresh strength when he is wearied, as you now are with fighting on behalf of your kinsmen." And Hector answered, "Honoured mother, bring no wine, lest you unman me and I forget my strength. I dare not make a drink offering to Jove with unwashed hands. One who is filth may not pray to the son of Saturn. Get the matrons together, and go with offerings to the temple of Minerva, driver of the spoil. There, upon the knees of Minerva, lay the largest and fairest robe you have in your house, the one you set most store by. Promise, moreover, to sacrifice 12 yearling heifers that have never yet felt the goad, in the temple of the goddess, if she will take pity on the town, with the wives and little ones of the Trojans, and keep the son of Tydeus from off the goodly city of Ilius, for he fights with fury, and fills men's souls with panic. Go then to the temple of Minerva, while I seek Paris and exhort him, if he will hear my words. Would that the earth might open her jaws and swallow him, for Jove bred him to be the bane of the Trojans, and of Priam and Priam's sons. Could I but see him go down into the house of Hades, my heart would forget its heaviness." His mother went into the house, and called her waiting women, who gathered the matrons throughout the city.
Oops. Well, I accidentally stopped it, but I can just jump in. I mean, it's sort of amazing things that Hector says about Paris, his brother, but totally
Well, this
understandable.
concept of going down to Hades, I mean, I think it reminds us that the Hebrew Bible, um, it's very similar, like the going down to Sheol, right? So
Hmm.
there isn't, like, unlike, and this is sort of the classical understanding of the New Testament versus the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible is not about the afterlife, right? Ultimately.
Yeah.
Um, Now, that's not to say that people haven't, Talmudists and whoever haven't divined a kind of afterlife in the clues in the symbols of the Hebrew Bible. That has occurred. And there is sort of fleeting mention of it. But what's mentioned is, I think it's called Shul, is the basically the Hebrew term for Hades, but the concept is essentially identical. And it's mentioned when Jacob is grieving, because Benjamin is in Egypt and he wants Benjamin to be returned to him. And he laments that he doesn't want to go down to Sheol. I think, yeah, and I'm paraphrasing here, and without his son, or not knowing the fate of his son, or you'll have to look at,
Hmm.
back at the Hebrew Bible to get the exact understanding there. But regardless, the concept is, it's the same. It's right. So it's a kind of Greek view, you could argue, a Greek cosmology to some extent, in the sense that we're not talking about heaven in the Christian sense of that word, right? Um, so I just thought I would point that out.
Yeah.
And again, that's not this. Some Jews, especially Orthodox Jews, have developed the concept of an afterlife. And that concept of an afterlife is closer to something like Hades, right? Like in the way that it's described, like it's lit only by a moon and it's in a kind of underworld.
Yeah, realm of shadows. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
it is fascinating because in the Odyssey, which we'll get to at some point, but Odysseus visits Achilles, and I think the line is Achilles would rather be the slave to a pig farmer, so about as low as you could get on Earth than he would be in his shadow realm. But it's also not hell in the way that we've and learned of it from the Christian tradition, where it is about you are bad in this world, or at the very least, you never put faith in Jesus Christ, and you're just being eternally tormented and punished endlessly. And it is a penal colony, and it's the most unimaginable horrors you could horrors beyond imagination, we should say. That you could visit in Bosch paintings and so on.
Yeah, on
Um,
some level, it seems to kind of develop as a metaphor for slavery, for human slavery, right?
mhm.
And we've talked before on these shows that there is likely, in my view, or at least in the origin of the myth, a kind of ethnic component to it,
Mhm.
right? So when Persephone, in some way, she starts as Chorus, this maiden daughter of Demeter, but when she changes in some way when she becomes the queen of the underworld, and
Yeah.
I would argue that she's in some manner Semitized, becomes Semitic, right?
Yeah.
Uh, uh, After she's leaving Demeter is described with this golden hair and so forth, and probably this is related to a metaphor about golden wheat and so forth.
Mhm.
Uh, but I think you understand my point. So there are many kind of layers
Yeah,
there.
I think there are layers because yeah, in that myth that becoming the queen of the underworld. Now, the upshot of the story that it's taken is Demeter loses her daughter and she wants her back, but she's eaten some pomegranate seeds, and but then Zeus sort of adjudicates the matter and she can come back for 6 months, and that's why we have seasons and so on. But there is another level to it. It is Hades, but in some versions it's Pluto. So the origins of plutocracy, the wealth, he's got gems down in the underworld. And so becoming the queen of the underworld is sort of like this, I don't know, to use a example riff from the headlines, this young girl from Kansas who's blonde and beautiful, and she gets caught up in Jeffrey Epstein's cult, and the next
Yeah,
thing you
yeah, no,
know
like,
she's
well,
like the
Pluto.
queen of the island. This being semitized but being kind of debauched and taken and etc. But that's what the hell is. It's something very different. It's not this like punishment for rejecting Jesus or punishment for not doing good works, however you want to view it. It's the underworld realm of the Jews, you could even say.
Yeah, yeah. Hades is the king of that underworld,
Yeah.
right? So his experience is probably different from the shades that inhabit the underworld because he's sort of maybe implicitly the kind of slave master, right?
Yeah.
But Pluto is the name that the Romans give Hades, essentially.
Hmm.
Um, but I think I think it does emerge first in the Greek. Pluton or something like this might
Hmm.
be a deity that is ultimately becomes the same as Hades at some point.
Hmm.
Uh, don't quote me on that, but there is what I know
They're
for sure.
related gods, and using
Yeah, yeah,
Roman interpretation, we can see them as sort of, variations on a
yeah.
theme. Let's say that.
Pluto and Hades are the same, so that
Yeah.
is true.
Yeah.
It's just Pluto becomes ultimately the Roman or Latin name for Hades.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, no, I agree 100%. Yeah, and I think and maybe that's more implied with Hades, then Pluto, it becomes the name Pluto is, yeah, to your point, it means wealth, right? So,
Yes.
and that gives him, so he becomes a wealth god, similar to Kronos and Saturn. Saturn also has that association. So these are clues that would might suggest him as, I mean, there are many clues that suggest him as essentially a kind of Semitic deity, but these are among them.
Yes. So it is interesting just how the concept of the afterlife gets transformed. Christianity wants us to have good and evil. Like heaven is the most brilliant place on earth. You live forever, and there's a bit of a hierarchy in heaven with the saints and Jesus throned, and however you want to imagine it. But it is this eternal good, and then everyone else you get to look down upon them being punished and so on. In the Greek sense, going to the underworld, it's very it's ambiguous. It is a shadow realm, and being alive is what is in fact valued. And then as we were saying again, it has this overlay of the chthonic, and even with a Christian, you can think of this like looking at a Hiroshima's Bosch painting, or even if you've ever been in like an Italian little chapel in some town in Italy where they'll have images of hell, don't be bad, you'll be sent down there. But it's hard to miss the kind of extreme sexualized manner of this, where it's like you're being punished, but you're almost being punished with sadomasochistic sex. There's like a little devil like skewering three people with a hot iron pole or something. There's a weird way, if you understand what I'm saying. It's not that it's not punishment or so on, but it's almost like punishment via extreme sex. I don't know, just throwing that out there.
Well, one thing I would remark, on the topic of the fate of mortals. The
Hmm.
mortals are, Tolkien says that men are doomed to die, right? And this is especially true in the Greco-Roman system. Like the mortals go to Hades, right? We find that one exception with Hercules. Hercules is able to make his way to Olympus,
Hmm.
uh, and um, other heroes try, right? They try to fly Pegasus up to Olympus and so forth. Um, but I think if we look at the gods, I think there's a way to look at the gods where, for example, Ares, and this is the argument I would make, that Ares especially represents, and I think this becomes especially kind of true or illuminated among the Romans with Mars, but he especially represents a kind of Aryan everyman, like a warrior. And
Hmm.
then among the Romans, he takes on more of a kind of agrarian, the farmer warrior, always ready to take up his sword and shield for the Republic, um, or the Empire.
Hmm.
And then I think that in Apollo, we could say represents something also Aryan, but more noble, right? He's the Koros, he's the noble youth. So he represents something noble. So if we understand those two gods in particular, if we understand them as racial archetypes, but something akin to, I would make the argument that something akin to like Judah or Esau, right? So Judah is a personality in the Hebrew Bible, but he also represents a tribe. He represents a people, right? He signifies so that he is so the character of Judah also is the tribe of Jews, right?
Hmm.
And I think that Apollo and Ares, I think that we can look at them and interpret them as having a kind of similar significance in the sense that they represent the tribe of Aryans. And something that's kind of, I would argue, is kind of moralizing is the idea that the tribe or the race itself would be immortal, would live on Olympus, right? But individual mortals are not. it's they're of a lesser significance and importance than the race itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's one way of looking at it, and that's and also in if you just take a general view of let's say you just interpret, you don't take as kind of nuanced a view as we take, where we're looking at these different gods as having a kind of um, racial or ethnic significance, which in my view is just patently obvious. But we just look at them as nobility, representing a kind of nobility of the Greeks and so forth. uh, they become this nobility in Greece becomes takes on a kind of immortal significance because it's kind of built to last. It's meant to last. Whereas everyone beneath this nobility, this is another layer of the metaphor, I would argue. Everyone who's a kind of mortal is in some way excluded from this nobility, and that becomes, that finds in this sort of mythological hierarchy, um, this becomes a kind of inspiration to like a real nobility living in Greece. That it becomes analogous, um, and there the message becomes that the nobility will abide, is powerful,
Mm-hmm.
will abide. Uh, what is beneath the nobility is ephemeral, it has no identity and so forth, right? Is not from strong, potent families and so forth, right?
Yeah.
In any case.
She then went down into her fragrant storeroom, where her embroidered robes were kept, the work of Sidonian women, whom Alexandrus had brought over from Sidon when he sailed the seas upon that voyage during which he carried off Helen. Hecuba took out the largest robe, and the one that was most beautifully enriched with embroidery, as an offering to Minerva. It glittered like a star, and lay at the very bottom of the chest. With this she went on her way, and many matrons with her. When they reached the temple of Minerva, lovely Theano, daughter of Cisseus and wife of Antenor, opened the doors, for the
Richard, let
Trojans had
me
made her priestess of Minerva. The women
let me just follow up with one other point. So in therefore, I think that, and whatever the original intention of these metaphors, um, I think that we can say that there is something salubrious, essentially, or healthy, or good about the idea that your race is immortal, and having a god that represents your race being immortal, like that just seems like a good system or a good idea. And that's effectively what Jews have with Yahweh, right? Yahweh is immortal and he represents Jews. So that becomes a way of also making Jews immortal, if you take my point,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if we move whatever the flaws we might find in the Greco-Roman religion, that seems like a kind of good practice or something that is good, and the connection between race and the gods is pretty clear in the language. I think it's in the Latin gens, for example, also it means race and tribe, but it also means chieftain gods. Um, so they're synonyms. The gods become a kind of synonym for the race or the tribe. And this is distinct, of course, from Christianity, where, you know, basically tribalism is a kind of is abolished with Christianity. And this, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
In any case, I mean, I guess this goes against I guess it goes against sort of the idea that I'm putting forth that the gods are global, but I think both can be true simultaneously. The gods both represent ethnic types, but are global because these ethnic types are in the ancient world have achieved the diaspora where we have Aryans everywhere, among the Trojans and among the Greeks, and we also have Semites everywhere, right? In any case.
lifted up their hands to the goddess with a loud cry, and Theano took the robe to lay it upon the knees of Minerva, praying the while to the daughter of great Jove. "Holy Minerva," she cried, "protectress of our city, mighty goddess, break the spear of Diomed and lay him low before the Scaean gates. Do this, and we will sacrifice 12 heifers that have never yet known the goad in your temple, if you will have pity upon the town, with the wives and the little ones of the Trojans." Thus she prayed, but Pallas Minerva granted not her prayer. While they were thus praying to the daughter of great Jove, Hector went to the fair house of Alexandrus, which he had built for him by the foremost builders in the land. They had built him his house, storehouse, and courtyard near those of Priam and Hector on the Acropolis. Here Hector entered with a spear 11 cubits long in his hand. The bronze point gleamed in front of him, and was fastened to the shaft of the spear by a ring of gold. He found Alexandrus within the house, busied about his armour, his shield and cuirass, and handling his curved bow. There too sat Argive Helen with her women, setting them their several tasks, and as Hector saw him he rebuked him with words of scorn. "Sir," said he, "you do ill to nurse this rancour. The people perish fighting round this our town. You would yourself chide one whom you saw shirking his part in the combat. Up then, or ere long the city will be in a blaze." And Alexandrus answered, "Hector, your rebuke is just. Listen, therefore, and believe me when I tell you that I am not here so much through rancour or ill will towards the Trojans, as from a desire to indulge my grief. My wife was even now gently urging me to battle, and I hold it better that I should go. For victory is ever fickle. Wait then while I put on my armour, or go first and I will follow. I shall be sure to overtake you." Hector made no answer, but Helen tried to soothe him. "Brother," said she, "to my abhorred and sinful self, would that a whirlwind had caught me up on the day my brother brought me forth, and had borne me to some mountain or to the waves of the roaring sea that should have swept me away ere this mischief had come about. But since the gods have devised these evils, would at any rate that I had been wife to a better man, to one who could smart under dishonour and men's evil speeches. This fellow was never yet to be depended upon, nor never will be, and he will surely reap what he has sown. Still, brother, come in and rest upon this seat, for it is you who bear the brunt of that toil that has been caused by my hateful self and by the sin of Alexandrus, both of whom Jove has doomed to be a theme of song among those that shall be born hereafter." And Hector answered, "Bid me not be seated, Helen, for all the goodwill you bear me. I cannot stay. I am in haste to help the Trojans, who miss me greatly when I am not among them. But urge your husband, and of his own self also let him make haste to overtake me before I am out of the city. I must go home to see my household, my wife and my little son, for I know not whether I shall ever again return to them, or whether the gods will cause me to fall by the hands of the Achaeans." Then Hector left her, and forthwith was at his own house. He did not find Andromache, for she was on the wall with her child and one of her maids, weeping bitterly. Seeing then that she was not within, he stood on.
Just quickly, and this is self-evident, but just kind of amazingly deep and critical comments about Paris and Helen's own feelings of guilt, wishing that she were caught up in a whirlwind rather than she were abducted by Paris and created all this tumult. There's also something, funny of Paris saying, "Oh, well, I'll be there momentarily. I'll overtake you as you go out to battle," to Hector, and you can almost think of Hector looking at him askance with these things. It's just very rich characterization.
Yeah, I agree.
Ambivalent. Yeah.
On the threshold of the women's rooms and said, "Women, tell me, and tell me true, where did Andromache go when she left the house? Was it to my sisters, or to my brothers' wives? Or is she at the temple of Minerva where the other women are propitiating that awful goddess?" His good housekeeper answered, "Hector, since you bid me tell you truly, she did not go to your sisters, nor to your brothers' wives, nor yet to the temple of Minerva where the other women are propitiating the awful goddess, but she is on the high wall of Iliad, for she had heard the Trojans were being hard pressed, and that the Achaeans were in great force. She went to the wall in frenzied haste, and the nurse went with her carrying the child." Hector hurried from the house when she had done speaking, and went down the streets by the same way that he had come. When he had gone through the city and had reached the Scaean gates through which he would go out on to the plain, his wife came running toward him, Andromache, daughter of great Eetion, who ruled in Thebes under the wooded slopes of Mount Placus, and was king of the Sicilians. His daughter had married Hector, and now came to meet him with a nurse who carried his little child in her bosom, a mere babe, Hector's darling son, and lovely as a star. Hector had named him Scamandrius, but the people called him Astyanax, for his father stood alone as chief guardian of Ilius. Hector smiled as he looked upon the boy, but did not speak, and Andromache stood beside him, weeping and taking his hand in her own. "Dear husband," said she, "your valour will bring you to destruction. Think on your infant son, and on my hapless self, who ere long shall be your widow, for the Achaeans will set upon you in a body and kill you. It would be better for me should I lose you to lie dead and buried, for I shall have nothing left to comfort me when you are gone, save only sorrow. I have neither father nor mother now. Achilles slew my father when he sacked Thebe, the goodly city of the Sicilians. He slew him, but did not for very shame despoil him. When he had burned him in his wondrous armour, he raised a barrow over his ashes, and the mountain nymphs, daughters of aegis-bearing Jove, planted a grove of elms about his tomb. I had 7 brothers in my father's house, but on the same day they all went within the house of Hades. Achilles killed them, as they were with their sheep and cattle. My mother, her who had been queen of all the land under Mount Bacchus, he brought hither with the spoil, and freed her for a great sum, but the archer-queen Diana took her in the house of your father. Nay, Hector, you who to me are father, mother, brother, and dear husband, have mercy upon me. Stay here upon this wall, make not your child fatherless, and your wife a widow. As for the host, place them near the fig tree, where the city can be best scaled, and the wall is weakest. Thrice have the bravest of them come thither and assailed it, under the 2 Ajaxes, Idomeneus, the sons of Atreus, and the brave son of Tydeus, either of their own bidding, or because some soothsayer had told them. And Hector answered, Wife, I too have thought on all this. But with what face should I look upon the Trojans, men or women, if I shirked battle like a coward? I cannot do so. I know nothing save to fight bravely in the forefront of the Trojan host, and win renown alike for my father and myself. Well do I know that the day will surely come when mighty Ilius shall be destroyed with Priam and Priam's people. But I grieve for none of these, not even for Hecuba, nor King Priam, nor for my brothers, many and brave, who may fall in the dust before their foes. For none of these do I grieve, as for yourself, when the day shall come on which one of the Achaeans shall rob you for ever of your freedom, and bear you weeping away. It may be that you will have to ply the loom in Argos at the bidding of a mistress, or to fetch water from the springs Mysaeus or Hyperia, treated brutally by some cruel taskmaster. Then will one say who sees you weeping, She was wife to Hector, the bravest warrior among the Trojans during the war before Ilius. On this your tears will break forth anew for him who would have put away the day of captivity for you. May I lie dead under the barrow that is heaped over my body ere I hear you cry as they carry you into bondage." He stretched his arms toward his child, but the boy cried and nestled in his nurse's bosom, scared at the sight of his father's armour, and at the horsehair plume that nodded fiercely from his helmet. His father and mother laughed to see him, but Hector took the helmet from his head and laid it all gleaming upon the ground. Then he took his darling child, kissed him, and dandled him in his arms, praying over him the while to Jove and to all the gods. "Jove," he cried, "grant that this my child may be even as myself chief among the Trojans. Let him be not less excellent in strength, and let him rule Ilius with his might. Then may one say of him as he comes back from battle, 'The son is far better than the father.' May he bring back the blood-stained spoils of him whom he has laid low, and let his mother's heart be glad." With this he laid the child again in the arms of his wife, who took him to her own soft bosom, smiling through her tears. As her husband watched her, his heart yearned towards her, and he caressed her fondly, saying, "My own wife, do not take these things too bitterly to heart. No one can hurry me down to Hades before my time. But if a man's hour is come, be he brave or be he coward, there is no escape for him when he has once been born. Go then within the house, and busy yourself with your daily duties, your loom, your distaff, and the ordering of your servants. For war is man's matter, and mine above all others of them that have been born in Ilius."
You also get a glimpse of this ancient mentality. First off, there is a sense of progress, if only in terms of valor and feats of arms. Of I hope one day my son will be greater than I am. So there is a very noble sense of progress with Hector. But there's also a sense that however heroic you
That's
are,
Richard, and just to
yeah,
dwell on
yeah,
that point
sure.
just a little bit, that's commonly seen as a fear of gods, is that their son is greater than them, right?
Oh yeah,
And
Kronos,
or
yeah.
yeah, and even Zeus, right? There's a fear that
Hmm.
Apollo will be greater than Zeus.
Hmm.
Uh, so it's interesting that Hector is depicted in some ways as more noble than Zeus in this regard, at least in some myths, right?
Yeah.
Um, and this is true. This explains the birth of Athena, is that she, Metis, I think, is the her mother, right? Who's a goddess of like cleverness or thought or something like this. Metis, and she's prophesized to have children that are stronger than their father will overthrow the father or something like this. So there's
Hmm.
some kind of negative prophecy. So to avert it, Zeus swallows Metis, right? Um, it doesn't work ultimately in some way, or this is sort of implied in the myth, is that, it might even be implied that Athena is mightier than Zeus, right, on some level,
Hmm.
right? Because she is born and she emerges, full grown from his head and so forth. Um, so I think you understand my point that Hector is his behavior is more noble,
Yeah.
right, than Zeus is, or at least as Zeus is depicted in some of these myths, right?
Yeah. But there's also something tempering if we're trying to get at the mentality of the ancient world, at least as depicted in Homer, of Hamlet at one point says, there's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. If my death is not now, then it is to come. If it was not before, then it will happen later. If it is not to come, then it will be now. Basically, there is a fate that you must face, and it's sort of out of your hands, excuse me, on some existential level. And I it's a lot like that, but it's slightly different. It's basically the gods will decide when I will be sent down to Hades, and that is up to them. It's so there is also, I guess, a certain sense of vulnerability as well, of going out into the world and being a plaything of the gods in effect. But that is certainly how they view it.
Yeah, and I mean, one other thing I was going to make to my original point was, of course, the gods, being immortal, have a different dilemma than men, um, because they're going to live forever. So um, they don't want another god that usurps
Hmm.
them, essentially, right? The stakes are greater, whereas mortal men will die and their sons will live after them. Um, so in also looking at or taking my earlier idea about these gods essentially representing tribes or races, um, that also seems to increase the stakes as well. So if the displacement of Zeus represents the displacement of a tribe or race, or the displacement of Kronos represents the displacement of a tribe, so the stakes are higher there, right?
Hmm.
I'll let you continue.
Yeah, continue.
He took his plumed helmet from the ground, and his wife went back again to her house, weeping bitterly and often looking back towards him. When she reached her home she found her maidens within, and bade them all join her in her lament. So they mourned Hector in his own house, though he was yet alive, for they deemed that they should never see him return safe from battle and from the furious hands of the Achaeans. Paris did not remain long in his house. He donned his goodly armour overlaid with bronze, and hasted through the city as fast as his feet could take him. as a horse, stabled and fed, breaks loose and gallops gloriously over the plain to the place where he is wont to bathe in the fair-flowing river. He holds his head high, and his mane streams upon his shoulders as he exults in his strength, and flies like the wind to the haunts and feeding ground of mares. Even so went forth Paris from high Pergamus, gleaming like sunlight in his armour, and he laughed aloud as he sped swiftly on his way. Forthwith he came upon his brother Hector, who was then turning away from the place where he had held converse with his wife, and he was himself the first to speak. "Sir," said he, "I fear that I have kept you waiting when you are in haste, and have not come as quickly as you bade me." "My good brother," answered Hector, "you fight bravely, and no man with any justice can make light of your doings in battle, but you are careless and wilfully remiss. It grieves me to the heart to hear the ill that the Trojans speak about you, for they have suffered much on your account. Let us be going, and we will make things right hereafter, should Jove vouchsafe us to set the cup of our deliverance before ever-living gods of heaven in our own homes, when we have chased the Achaeans from Troy." End of Book 6.
All right.
Cool. I guess it was relatively shorter. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess we could take some questions.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, we lost a little bit of time. We lost maybe like 10 minutes there at some point where we were
Yeah,
trying to
I will. I'm gonna figure this out. I'm gonna put little post-it notes with the audiobook chapter throughout the Fagles book, so I can get it right. But that'll just take me some time. But uh, yeah, I was thinking about continuing to book 9. The way I thought of this was one. We actually did 3 because that's such an evocative chapter of Menelaus fighting Paris and then Paris being abducted and taken to the bed of Helen. It's just an amazing scene. That was 3. So we did 1 and 3, and then 6, 9, 16, 22, and then 24. So book 9 is the embassy to Achilles. But yeah, does anyone have any questions or any comments, something they'd like to talk about?
Can the caller restate the earlier question about Hera and Poseidon working on the side of the Trojans or something in an earlier book, or the Greeks rather?
Hey, yeah, that's me. So it's in book 1, and then it's referenced again in book 15.
Okay.
I don't have the exact passage, but
What's the upshot though, Fred?
yeah. So basically speaking, I think it's Hephaestus is complaining to Hera, and he's saying, don't fuck with Zeus, basically, right? He's saying, you, Poseidon, and Athena conspired against him, and it didn't work out well for you last time. So, don't bark up that tree, essentially.
Yeah. And
So
Hephaestus is probably especially fearful of Zeus because Zeus in the myths has a adversary, or has
Tossed
a
him out.
tumultuous relationship with Hephaestus.
Yeah. What's interesting about it to me is that, like, ostensibly all 3 are supposed to be Aryan gods. I mean, Poseidon maybe is a bit more questionable, but
No, Hephaestus definitely not, I would say. I think Hephaestus is a clearly proto-Jewish god.
sorry, no, Poseidon, Hera, and Athena, I meant.
Oh yeah, no, well, definitely, yeah, and that's why I think that it's just kind of complex. So Hera, definitely, she's a diurnal sky goddess. Um, Athena might be a little more complex. I mean, I think that she is ultimately represents something Aryan. She's the gray-eyed goddess, which in a gray eyes are like super blue eyes, like right, like people. I mean, they're only common in, or they're not common anywhere, but the only place where they occur with relative frequency is in Scandinavia, as far as I understand, gray eyes.
Hmm.
But but there could also be a sort of kind of metaphor there going on with the gray eyes as well, right? Um, and but Hephaestus, I think, is definitely kind of a proto-Jewish Pelasgian figure. And he has a ambivalent relationship with Zeus. Of course, he forges his lightning bolts. So he's kind of his assistant. He's Zeus's assistant as well, right? And he helps the gods defeat the Titans um, through the forging, in particular through the forging of these lightning bolts. And his forge is managed by these Cyclops, right? Um, that become especially famous in the Odyssey.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So are you must be looking forward to Christopher Nolan's upcoming film, Richard, I would assume.
Well, I mean, I almost detect a little sarcasm in what you're saying, but
No, I'm not.
yes, you're not. No sarcasm. Okay, I
No, I'm
am. I
not.
mean, look, obviously, Christopher Nolan has made some amazing films, and including his last one. I also have to say what I've seen thus far is not very auspicious, to be honest.
He's not very
Um,
good. Yeah,
yeah, a lot of people have mentioned this sort of washed out gray kind of Zack Snyder like look, desaturated look to the film and what they're showing. Um,
sure.
the other thing that I was thinking of is, if there was an actual Trojan War in the Bronze Age, it would have been, let's say 1200 years before Christ. And then Homer was writing roughly 800 years, 800 BC. Um, and then I think our common image of ancient Greece probably is more about the time of the Peloponnesian Wars. And so I feel like what he's depicting, Christopher Nolan, who's trying to do a realistic Odyssey, they've said they're doing, they're keeping CGI to a minimum and they have practical effects, and that could be interesting. But it seems like it takes place in like 450 BC or so on in terms of the look. And I was just thinking about this the other day. It would be almost interesting just to do a like hyper realistic Odyssey or Iliad where it would be like actual Bronze Age barbarians like fighting each other. I mean that could be very cool. Just show the total brutality of the Bronze Age. I mean, an interesting choice. And another interesting choice would be to set it in the time of Homer. Um, but I don't know. It seemed like also we had moved away from this sort of multiracial casting, with like the Norsemen, which was about Scandinavian myth that would have, I guess that would have taken place in like the Dark Ages because there was like early Christianization going on. So I don't know, 800 AD or I don't know. But I don't know. Supposedly Athena is played by a black woman. I don't know. I thought we had sort of moved
Yeah,
beyond
right.
these.
Yeah,
Yes,
there's actually a book called Black
she's a good
Athena.
actor, but yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, Black
I there's
Athena is a Afro. Isn't that like an Afrocentrist book?
yeah, about Greece.
Yeah,
It's basically we was Kang's is the
right.
thesis.
We was Plato.
It's the Hotep thesis essentially, but whatever. I don't really I don't really blame blacks for attempting to do that or whatever.
Right. We was Beethoven, y'all. I've heard that one actually. Um, I mean, that's funny. I don't know if that's even like a conscious reference made by Nolan or something. I don't know. There's a lot that's a little bit dubious about this whole
It's kind
Nolan
of
thing.
strange that he would. I mean, just based on the films that we've seen, he seems like it actually does seem like there's a kind of racial awareness in his films.
Hmm.
So maybe he'll surprise us and we'll perceive reasons for some of his choices that are that are interesting, as opposed to just him pandering to DEI or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Which is a possibility. I mean, it's not, it's he's still. I mean, Hollywood is corporate, right? So there are these uh, demands placed on directors when they're casting films, right?
Hmm.
What I mean, uh, if they're going to pay for the film, they're going to say, well, we need diversity. Like, I mean, that's something that occurs in Hollywood, obviously. And
Yeah.
even, I mean, Nolan. It seems Nolan is of such a status, though, that he could just sort of be free to cast his film however he
And
wanted.
I
But
thought that I genuinely thought that look, so-called colorblind casting, but it's actually DEI casting if we're honest. That is not something that is new. That was going on in the 90s, and we're just seeing the continuation of it now. Like it's not like even a woke thing. It's a like 30-year thing. But I
we
thought,
have to do, Richard. We're gonna have to do a YouTube video where we're just like, and Athena's black. What the fuck?
yeah. Well, it's the
Totally
woke.
woke.
It used to just be about storytelling, and now it's like woke. They're making everything racial.
Oh yeah, yeah,
By
exactly.
yeah, we used to be colorblind, but now it's all racial. That's sort of how they spin it. It's like
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of
we
course.
were once non-racial, but now we're so racial. It's just
Yeah.
ridiculous. But and because they're mad about the Little Mermaid being black, like that's what they're mad about. That they are the racist in a way. I mean, I don't know,
Well,
but
obviously, but they're trying to,
yeah,
trying to
but
say, but
yeah,
Dems are the racists. It's basically Dems are the racist. Is
yeah. But I just thought that we had passed over this, if only for like a sake of variety or something. Just because Hollywood had been pushing that for so long, I thought that again for variety's sake alone, I thought it would be sort of interesting just to do a white Iliad and just be like, this is for the whites. But now I don't know. We'll see who's cast as
well,
Apollo
it's
if
it's
Apollo
the
appears.
Odyssey, right? It's the
Yes, the
Odyssey.
Odyssey, not the Iliad. Yes.
Yeah, and Troy, I forget the name of that. There's some German filmmaker. I think he's also the guy that did. Who did Troy? Do you remember who that
Oh,
filmmaker is?
Wolfgang Peterson.
Okay, what were his earlier films?
Didn't he do the Never-Ending Story? I believe he did actually.
In any case, yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that was a white. It
Oh
was
yeah.
white. Uh, but yeah, it was a different era, of course. Um, and I think that probably Greeks who watch that are like, where are all the Greeks? Right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Because they want him to
But
look like modern Greeks or something. Yeah.
exactly, and we know that's not what Achilles looked
Yeah.
like.
Y- Yeah,
We
Wolfgang
know.
Peterson did direct. He directed Troy and he directed The Never-Ending Story. He directed Das Boot. Yeah, or Das Boot. Um, that's an amazing film. I have to say, and he directed some other like Hollywood movies like Air Force One and The Perfect Storm. He hasn't done much recently. Yeah, I've said this many times over. In terms of uh, movies for children that have really held up and that I just find really good. The Neverending Story. I think that's a great film. I mean, it has sort of an obvious moral, which is you need to keep believing. Like you got to use your imagination and not succumb to nihilism. It's a the nothing, which is the great enemy in that story. I think it's a great. I don't think it's gem exactly. I mean, there is a little bit of esoterica going on, but um, it's I just think it's a great film, regardless of when it was made and regardless which audience it's directed towards.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it when I was very young, and I don't really. I mean, I think I enjoyed it as a kid, but I did,
Hmm.
I uh, never returned to it. You're probably watching it with your kids, presumably.
Yeah, I saw it a few
Uh,
years ago again for the first time in like 20 years or 30 years. I don't even know. But yeah, I loved it. I thought it was just a fantastic film.
I remember as a kid, I think I was old enough to like be like I didn't like the dog dragon, right? I was just like, ah, no, that's gay. So I think maybe I was too old when I saw it. I don't know.
Hmm.
Maybe I could have been younger and I would have been more into the dog dragon. Northern Invader.
Hey, I'm curious what you guys think about since Persephone came up earlier, and I don't know if this came up in the hymn discussion, but I think it's in the hymn to Demeter and a couple other sources. It mentions that Zeus makes a deal with Hades to sort of, well, I'm sorry, I think I muted myself.
Yeah.
Um, but so Zeus makes this deal with Hades that he'll give her Persephone in a couple different myth sources, the earliest being the hymn to Demeter, probably, but Apollodorus and Ovid also do the same thing. Do you guys have a reading on that? It's significant. I mean, it just kind of seems like, I don't know, mocking the Aryan patriarch in a way. Haha, you give your daughter away to the rich Pelasgian or rich Etruscan or Semite or what have you.
No, Richard mentioned that, so it becomes a myth that explains the seasons, right?
Oh no,
Um,
but the significance of Zeus making a deal with Hades that in
of
secret that Hades
allowing,
can have her
yeah, of what, yeah.
because she's his daughter by Demeter.
Yeah, I mean, I think it shows basically it shows the relationship between the gods, right? I mean, they're not, Zeus is not necessarily in opposition to Hades. I think you'll remember the famous myth where essentially Zeus is assigned the skies, is able to rule the sky, and then sort of second best is the ocean, which goes to Poseidon, and third best goes to Hades, right? Which is the underworld. Um, so I think that there is, I mean, I think it's signifying that there is a relationship there. I don't think it's, um, is your point that, I mean, I think that if your point is, is it, they making some effort to like humble diurnal or celestial deity?
Um, I
This
mean, on
occurred.
behalf of the writer, it might be identifying, at least the way it reads to me, it seems like a sort of if, I mean, Zeus and Jupiter, they trace back to the Indo-European Deus Pater. So, I mean, Hades, I don't know what its origin is. I think Graves also identifies Poseidon as having an Indo-European origin, like linguistically. So, like, even if there is like a Pelasgian influence over Zeus from, so like you mentioned on the last call, he takes refuge in Mount Ida and so forth. There are certain things. His bolts come from, um, in some versions, Hephaestus. Like I understand that, like Zeus, he's not like this perfect Aryan patriarch,
Mhm.
and might this sort of be denoting a sort of like it's this father who gives away his daughter to this kind of outsider figure. If we can assume that Zeus is a broadly Aryan father, and that Hades is this broadly Semitic counterpart.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's showing a
The
compromise.
sort of racial
It's
openness.
showing that Hades has some power in this relationship, evidently, right? He has to make a concession, essentially. I mean, that's the way I would read it. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, but if you're arguing, is was the myth developed to kind of humble Zeus? Sure, you could make that argument. I mean, there are many examples of diurnal gods essentially being humbled effectively.
Well, yeah.
We often point to the example of Apollo, whether with Daphne or Cassandra or with some of these myths that emerge in Sparta that show him with a male lover and so forth, right? Um, but hopefully what I've said is addresses what you're getting at.
Yeah,
Um,
no. Sure, man. It's just a pat. I mean, yeah, the Aryan being humbled within these myths is a pattern. I'm also curious if you guys, if you're familiar, there's these linear B tablets that were because you guys brought up Poseidon, which made me think of this. In Knossos in Crete and in Pylos in the Peloponnese, they found these tablets that would have been used by Minoans or some kind of Mycenaean, where they actually show Poseidon as their chief god, and as sort of like the earthquake god. And they describe him as being elevated over Zeus,
Hmm.
and they actually list Dionysus as one of their gods, despite how archaic it was, and despite the fact that they were that Dionysus is described as a younger god. It seems like he is an older, this is just an older recordation of him, and Apollo's actually left off those tablets, at least the one in Crete. Um, so that because you guys were talking about Poseidon, it got me thinking of sort of um, this dichotomy where we sort of have the early Poseidon, at least as like as Grave as I from like Graves, he kind of describes this Proto-Indo-European river god of the horse, Poseidon, who you guys have talked about at length. But it seems that his flag is sort of taken up by these Cretans, Pelasgians, pirates, and almost like claimed as one of their own, turned over to be the Phonic god. I mean, Phonic does mean underwater. Um, so I don't know. I was just wondering if you guys are familiar with those
What
those
sonic means
discoveries.
under earth, doesn't it?
I believe it means both.
Okay. Um, yeah, well, what I would say is that yeah, Zeus is a rather Poseidon is in my view he's kind of ethnically ambiguous. I mean, I was aware of the details that you were pointing to earlier that he's thought to have originated from a river, like a freshwater river god, right? Which I think that we would we may class that as a potentially Aryan god, right? A river god. So freshwater versus saltwater, or this is part of this is one of the ideas that I put forth in Arium theory. Um, but there are other things, I mean, including the points that you're raising here that make him sort of a curious character. But it would make sense if we have a seafaring group like the Pelasgians worshiping Poseidon, right? And you're talking about uh, the Minoans, um, but that they were also culturally there's strong, in my view, there's strong proto-Jewish currents in in that civilization as that civilization developed. In that the Minoan cults will become influential in the Chthonic cults, or this is what uh, people think, right? This is the theory. This is sort of the mainstream theory is that the Eleusinian mysteries, for example, come from Crete, right? Um, so yeah, Poseidon himself, though, I think that he's kind of an ambiguous. That's what I would say, and I actually think that the symbol of like salt water is suggestive, right? Suggestive he's a god that could represent foreignness, for example, the ocean foreignness, um, but certainly seafaring and trade and those sort of things as well. As far as his association to the horse, that is curious because I think that the horse, in my view, the horse
Kind
has
of
a clear kind of Aryan significance.
quintessentially Orion.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's interesting. I think that where he's associated most closely with the horse is his gift to the Athenians, right? Um, Correct me if I'm wrong, if there's some other sort of salient association with the horse. Um, and I think that doesn't necessarily, again, I think that I think this is a kind of important thing to realize that I think that we're realizing in this study is that, for example, so Dionysus, one of his attributes is a donkey, but it's not a totem. It's not like spirit animal, so to speak. It's not. It doesn't represent him. He's not represented by the donkey, but in my view, the donkey signifies someone, the fool who is sort of addicted to vice and is controlled by Dionysus. And he has this. The donkey takes on this similar, a similar significance vis-a-vis Judah. That's my reading of it. So and so then the question becomes with the horse and Poseidon. Does the horse represent Poseidon, or is it a kind of attribute? Is it something that he controls,
Hmm.
for example? Right? I don't know if you understand my meaning.
Absolutely, as if he's sort of like the horse is like a captive resource, and you might have like a trader who like, or you might even come on a boat with horses to like bring this resource to offer it as a gift or something. You can almost say there are, like, depending on how you identify Poseidon, like there are two contradictory readings almost.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I would
I was
agree.
just gonna add, I'm pretty sure that in all fairness, some of his oldest cults in Arcadia, which which are supposed to be like there of the four Greek dialects, that is the one that is closest to ancient Mycenaean Greek. He was actually more associated with the horse, and it seems that the association left him as time went on, which would suggest a sort of Semitization rather than the other way.
I
Yeah,
think
I
that
mean
makes the most sense.
that's interesting. Yeah, I mean the other thing I would add too to this conversation is that the ocean represents a kind of, you could argue, a kind of liminal realm, right? It's somewhere between the underworld and heaven, earth and heaven and so forth, right? Um, so maybe he possibly he, or at least as he develops, you guys say that, maybe he becomes Semitized. So maybe as he develops, he comes to take on this more liminal significance, right? Where he's between Hades and Zeus. So therefore he's Semitic, or has some Semitic aspect to him, you could argue, right? And the oceans also have the significance of being related to, myths in the ancient world. Often someone is passing into the ocean to go to the underworld. There was passing over the ocean to go to, the Isle of the Blessed. The ocean has an association with the afterworld as well. So those are things to consider. But yeah, I mean, I think that the idea that maybe he was Semitized, I think, yeah, it seems like a possibility, definitely.
I mean,
What? Oh,
that
sorry. Go ahead, then I'll jump in.
oh,
Yeah.
thanks. I just smart. I kind of just can't stop thinking about, like, since last week you mentioned that, um, Zeus as and maybe I'm mischaracterizing it, but you almost mentioned him like as or at least the literary Zeus as a Palastian innovation, right? Um, what, like,
Which is
how exactly
distinct
do you
from
think that would
his
have taken
identity, which is
place?
distinct from his identity, of course, right?
So you're almost saying that, like, the Palastians developed the character, still admitting almost and implying that he's one of us, but they're going to seed in characteristics like his refuge in Mount Ida, for instance, and other things that might give them some more cachet. Is that sort of the line,
Yeah, I
the
mean, it's sort
theory?
of like I think that the modern comparison that I frequently make is, if we understand Brad Pitt as a kind of Apollo, right, in Hollywood, um, he becomes a model for Gentiles. Like, he becomes a mirror to Gentiles, and Jews, or people who are making parables, are able to direct the ethos of people who see him as a role model and see themselves in him. So it becomes a way of directing ethos. Myth becomes a way of directing ethos, essentially, right? Um, and so, and this would be a way for foreign people to basically say, okay, well, here's a god that looks like you. This is how this god behaves. This is what this god's interested in. and these are the sort of the priorities of the god. This is how this god interacts with other gods. He's friendly with Hephaestus, and so forth, right? And he's friendly with Hermes. He becomes best friends with Hermes in the Homeric hymn. Maybe you understand my point. So mythos becomes the way of directing ethos, but the god itself becomes a god, again, like Brad Pitt in Hollywood. So
Oh, of course that makes sense.
yeah, and that's one theory. Now, I'm not I don't think anyone can know whether or not Apollo, the authorship of Apollo, is either Pelasgian or Indo-European. I think ultimately it's a question, it's an answer that's lost to time. But I think I think it is possible that some of these Aryan gods basically had a kind of Pelasgian authorship, and the reason for that is to create a model to say, okay, this appeals to the Hellenes. Because it looks like the Hellenes, and they will follow this because it is an ethnic, archetype of them, and therefore I can control their behavior through this kind of puppet that represents them, essentially. If that makes sense to you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one possibility, and that's either something that develops at the origin of the appearance of a god, or it represents a kind of corruption develops later. And again, the answer there is unknown. But I think that I tend to think that the Pelasgians, for example, and Proto-Jews generally, are disproportionately involved in the development of myth in the ancient world. That's what I'll just say as a kind of general rule.
Oh, what I wanted to mention briefly about Dionysus in Otto's book on Dionysus, he does suggest that this the very notion of a wine god connected to madness, etc., might very well be very deep. Now, a lot of the story of Dionysus we have from the later myths and from Greek tragedies like Euripides, what's translated as the Bacchae. And he's basically a new god. He's the son of Zeus demanding recognition. And that might be a kind of later spin on his story. But using Roman interpretation, we can kind of see like there might very well be a deep Dionysian god that is very old.
Oh, sure. And I think also in these myths, the age sometimes reflects also the status. I mean, the obvious example would be Apollo, who's the youth, he's the
Mm-hmm.
prince, right? But but on the other hand, he's also understood as a kind of civilizational founder, as the northern invader and so forth, right? As the Hellene.
Yeah.
So that theoretically that would make him ancient, uh, and he is ancient. I think he is a kind of definitive archetypal um, Indo-European Aryan god who represents the northern invader who came down in a chariot, right? He's
Mm-hmm.
got the chariot, and that's his significance ultimately. He represents that sort of founding race of the Hellenes,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you know. And to me, it's just a kind of clear. It's just sort of very clear, right? Because and all his symbols are sort of the symbols that we find among these pre-civilizational Indo-European settlers, essentially. Um, this fixation with the horse, an interest in sun discs and this sort of thing. Um, it's and ultimately the development of the chariot, right?
Mm-hmm.
But those are symbols of Apollo.
A play called Italy. You want to jump in? Then we'll bring it to a close.
Yeah, just really quick.
Mm-hmm.
Just to follow up on what people mentioned about Poseidon, and we talked about it last week a little bit. Was this a proto-Jewish authorship that was taking an Indo-European concept of a god that was floating around, away in the past, and then they're kind of synthesizing it. I don't know, Mark and Richard, I know Mark has mentioned that, a lot of this, this proto-Jewish stuff could even go back to Sumer. Do you think that even like a story like Gilgamesh was like an original Sumerian story that, I think the Akkadians came along later and kind of synthesized it into the epic we now know today? Do you think something similar happened in Iraq, in southern Iraq, in antiquity, or do you think that was like a kind of a proto-Jewish innovation from the beginning?
Well, so I mean, the general theory of REM is again, proto-Jewish contributions are significant, and this goes back to Sumer. With Sumer, in fact, I would even say we have in Sumer we have a Sumerian pantheon, and we have an Akkadian pantheon that develops later. The Akkadians are supposed to be the first Semitic speaking people, right, in civilization. And they have this relationship with the Sumerians, ultimately supplanting the Sumerians. The Sumerians, the language there is an isolate and hasn't been classified as Semitic or anything else or Indo-European. Um, uh, but my sense, my sense is basically we're dealing with this sort of old struggle between the Aryan and the Semite, with the Akkadian representing the Semite and the Sumerian. We have these idols from Sumeria with the blue-eyed idols and so forth. What exactly that race looks like, this is something that there's a big genome project going on now, and I think that, but I think that there's room for error and things being politicized and so forth. And also in a kind of interpretation of archaeological details and the significance of remains, and were these immigrants, were they kings, were they slaves, or whatever the case may be. You can imagine. Um, but yeah. So what I would say though is my theory is that proto-Jews, basically the language is less important. So Northern Invader was saying that Poseidon may have an Indo-European root. To me, that's less significant than the language is less significant than, for example, the meanings of names. I think may have more significance in many cases. The reason I say this is even in Sumeria we have it's basically uh, the Akkadian civilization, the Sumerian civilization, bilingualism is rife, right? So people are, Akkadians are speaking Sumerian and so forth, right? So if Stan Lee, to use the modern example, Stan Lee um, has a character called Spider-Man. The name Spider-Man is Indo-European, but the significance of the character is not Indo-European. The significance of the character is Jewish. So I think you understand my point. And I think in Sumer, we also see opportunities basically for proto-Jewish messaging in the Sumerian myth body. Um, and I guess maybe a kind of salient example of this would be uh, the the overthrow. It's the overthrow, or it's the kind of use. It's the kind of displacement ultimately of Anu, and Anu is a figure who's equivalent to Uranus or Caelus, um, and so there's similarities basically with those myths and the myth of Saturn overthrowing Uranus and Caelus and so forth, or displacing them. And the character that follows is a kind of curious character. Uh, in Lil, I think is his name. Sometimes it's translated as Lord of the Wind. Often he's compared to Zeus, but he might be more comparable, or at least in a narrative way, to Kronos for reasons that I've just described, or Saturn. And so I think already you're seeing in the Sumerian language, you're seeing proto-Jewish myths, if that makes sense to you. The language is Sumerian, but the perspective is proto-Jewish. And what is proto-Jewish at that point? Well, proto-Jewish is most simply, we could say like a priest class, essentially competing with a founding nobility or founding right, maybe in Sumeria it was a Aryan or Aryan in blood. Whether it was Indo-European language is a different, it's a kind of separate or a different consideration. But that a god like Anu would represent this Aryan, right? Uranus would represent this Aryan. Caelus represents this Aryan. It's displaced by another god that represents this sort of priest class that's using religio culture in a kind of ultimately a mating competition against the founding stock, the kings, the warriors that established the civilization, right? They colonized and established the civilization. Hopefully this makes sense to you guys, or you understand where I'm going with this. Was that clear? Just give me a little feedback on that, and I'll try to clarify.
Yeah, no, I think I get where you're coming from. I mean, there's different points that you're hitting on too. So it's kind of, yeah, I mean, it's hard to address all of it, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think the Sumerian stuff is interesting, and it predates a lot of the Greek stuff too. So I've always thought that would be something worth maybe investigating more one of these days if you guys want to.
Well, yeah, Mesopotamia, in that ultimately Mesopotamia is the origin of the Jews, ostensibly, right? So there was a proto-Jewish group, it seems, that came from Mesopotamia. We have this myth of Abraham coming from Ur. Ur is named for the moon god, Nana. So named for the Sumerian moon god, Nana, right? And so this becomes another clue. So in the Sumerian pantheon, Nana becomes dominant over the sun god, Utu, right? The Akkadian names are Shamash and Sin, right? Sin is the moon god. So that tells us, if that's happening in the Sumerian myth, that a lunar god is becoming dominant over a solar god, then that to me says gem, right? This is a kind of original or early form of gem. And then from Mesopotamia, what will become Jews? They're called the Hyksos when they were expelled from Egypt. Come from Mesopotamia, and probably this would also, I think, explain the trend of circumcision, which seems to originate in Mesopotamia and go to Egypt, right? Yeah. So I mean, the short answer is that proto-Jews, I think, are deeply influential in the development of mythology from the beginning of civilization, or what we call civilization. And probably in another example of this are, the Song of Solomon. There's a Jewish scholar who's done excellent work on this. Kramer is his last name. Those trace to love songs between what are the gods? Inanna, who's Ishtar, becomes Ishtar in the Akkadian, and Dumazid, this kind of Semitic, I would argue, a sort of Semitic figure who's a shepherd, and the love songs of the Song of Solomon derive from those love songs in Sumeria. So it's, in my view, it's kind of, it's directly traceable. Proto-Jewish, it's what I mean? So the language is less important. So I mean, it is interesting that Poseidon, for example, is Indo-European, but it's like, again, it's like Stan Lee can, write in a Germanic language and invent characters in a Germanic language. Someone in Sumeria who speaks both Sumerian and Akkadian, but is, racially Semitic, as opposed to linguistically Semitic, um, can invent a myth that is essentially kind of subversive on some level, right? That represents this battle between kings and priests, this battle between Apollo and Hermes, right? In any case, hopefully that's, I mean, I know it's a little, I try to be as sort of concrete as possible, but I think we also need to speak uh, more abstractly and have a theory basically that that is may not be true all the time, but is true most of the time, right? Is roughly true, right?
All right. Do you guys want to put a bookmark in it here?
Yeah, no, I just one thing though, a play called Italy pointed out. Yeah, there's an ancient Sumerian text called Inanna prefers the farmer, and this is a good like piece of evidence making the case essentially. And there, it's a poem describing how Inanna, who's a sky goddess, who is the sister of um, Utu, the sun god. She is trying to pick between a shepherd character and a farmer character. And the farmer character we could see as a kind of proto Adam or a proto Cain or a proto Esau, right? And the shepherd character we can see as a proto Jacob or proto Seth or something, right? Um, and 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 Utu, the sun god, is actually kind of like cocked basically in the poem, and he's like, oh yeah, he's actually advocating for the shepherd over the farmer for his own sister, right? His own sister is a goddess, so it's suggesting sort of nobility. The shepherd is marrying into nobility and so forth, and the but she actually Inanna innately prefers the farmer, right? Um, and it's because she's the farmer is of a closer racial stock to her. Um, I would be one way of looking at it. So yeah, that's a kind of classic example that sort of makes the case that the Sumerians there's gem. So in the Sumerian language, there's gem, right? Even though we don't know the Sumerian language is not Semitic. We don't. It's an isolate. Um, but there's gem in it, right? So there you go. There's gem in Spider-Man. So there you go. It's the same phenomenon. All right, yeah, I guess
All right.
we can call it.
Okay, guys. I will talk to everyone soon. Okay. Thank you.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Bye.